Hi everyone, welcome. We are glad to host this 3-day test fiesta for you guys. Hope you guys are learning and enjoying all our sessions. We are at the final day of the conference and we are loved your support and enthusiasm. We are feel honored to be a part of this community. I am Srivishnu Aigari, Senior Product Manager at Automation LambdaTest, and I will be the host for this session. Before we start the session, we would like to thank all our partners for supporting and promoting us this event. So let me introduce you to the speaker for this amazing session, Filip Hric. Although hailing from a psychology background, Philip landed in technology, authored Cypress.io. He is a father of three beautiful children. He is passionate about music and running. He is always learning, blogging, streaming, creating videos and online courses which can be found on philiphric.com. Today, he will talk about how fun Cypress API testing can be. Are you guys excited to listen to him? Please welcome Mr. Philip Hric.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I really appreciate being here. I had a lot of fun preparing this presentation, so let's jump right into it. So,
Awesome. Let's get started.
as thank you very much. As it was already mentioned, as it was mentioned in the program, we're going to be talking about testing API in Cypress. And as I received already quite a good introduction, there's nothing too much to add to this. Basically, that's all. That's everything has been said. I am doing some workshops that are coming really soon, and I'm going to tell you about them at the end of this presentation. Maybe that's just a little thing that hasn't been mentioned or maybe wasn't highlighted. So I will do that at the end. So, yeah, nice to meet you. My name is Filip Hric, and let's just jump right into it. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about how to test API with Cypress. So, the first question we need to answer is, what is Cypress? Obviously, many of you already know what Cypress is, but for those who are curious and haven't maybe tried it, let me just give you a couple of bullet points. So, very briefly put, Cypress is a tool for testing anything that runs in a browser. So, if you're curious, if you want, when you want to run something or test something in Cypress and you're not sure if you're able to, if you can open it in browser, then it's pretty sure. I'm pretty sure you can test it with Cypress. So, it's built from ground up, so it doesn't use Selenium. It's a new kind of approach, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in the next slide. And tests can be written in JavaScript or in TypeScript, so language of the web. Tests are running inside the browser, so basically that's the reason why we have JavaScript and TypeScript at our disposal. And since it's running inside the browser, you have some great features which I'm going to demonstrate. Also, Cypress is open source, so you can start using it today completely for free. They do have a paid service; it's called Dashboard. If you have already written a couple of your tests, you can add another layer to that. Uh, all right. So the question that gets asked the most: how is Cypress different from Selenium or from some other technologies that have come before? So I have these two slides, which I borrowed from my friend 𝒄𝒏𝒄𝒆, who was talking about Cypress and how you can use Cypress without Selenium because it's not using Selenium in the background. So the basic structure of Selenium tests is something like this. You have your tests, which can be written in various different languages, and Selenium will create a server that's going to call a browser driver to basically automate the browser. And the communication is being done with HTTP request. So you're sort of entering the browser from outside. Now, with Cypress, the architecture is slightly different because you will have a browser, so that can be Chrome, Electron, Firefox. We're waiting for support for Safari and maybe some other browsers. But basically, Cypress will open the browser and then inject the test code inside the browser. So what you will end up with are two iframes. One iframe runs your application, and the other iframe is where the test script is. And the test scripts are calling the application, which gives you a couple of advantages. One of them being that you are in the same event loop as your application, and you can access the state of the application. You can watch what your application is doing, how is it calling different functions, how different HTTP calls are being made, and you can play around with it. So I'm going to show you that in just a minute. One really fun way of how you can use Cypress, it is basically known as an end-to-end testing tool or UI testing tool. One fun thing you can do is to use it for testing your API. And there are different kind of approaches you can choose when you decide to test an API of your application. So we can test our APIs by directly calling an HTTP call and testing the response. That's what we can do. We can also test against JSON schema and make sure that the response we get from the server will be the one that we are actually expecting. We can also watch our application do the HTTP calls or the API calls, and we can actually change the status. We can stop the response. We can combine real response with a stub one and basically get to different kinds of edge cases. So let me not only talk about it, but let me actually show you a demo. So let's jump into it. Oops, I accidentally went to another slide. So here I have VS Code editor on my desktop, and I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to run Cypress, but also I have an application that we will be testing. So let me just start that application with npm start, and then I'm going to open Cypress with npx cypress open command, which is the one used for opening Cypress. All right. So we got our Cypress. We're going to do end-to-end testing. And I do have two files over here, test final and test start. So if you want to check out this code, you can actually find it on my GitHub. And I just realized I forgot to include the link for my GitHub for this, but it's basically GitHub/Filip Hric. So hopefully you'll find it. Anyways, I have two files. One is test start. This is where I'm going to be starting. And if you're curious about this, you can take a look into the test final, where the final code of this presentation will be. So you can play around with it, etc. So let me start with the test start. My browser is open, my test is running, and let me just show you the code that is running our test. So we just have a single command. I have multiple tests over here, but I have filtered out the one that I want to use with it.only. This means I'm just going to run the single test and not all of them. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm visiting my application. So this is an application I have created for my workshops and demonstrations, etc. And it's basically a knockoff or a clone of the Trello application, which is sort of a to-do list. But instead of having a single to-do list, you can create a board, something that's called board, where you can have multiple to-do lists, and you can arrange them and do fun stuff with them. But today we're just going to be focusing on creating these boards. So I just created one by typing in and hitting the enter key, and if I go home, I can see that the item is here, the board is created. Now, as I was interacting with my application, you could have seen that there are these different HTTP calls being made by the application. So whenever we create a new board, there is a request with a method of post called to the URL of API boards. Now, when we want to do API testing, the first thing we usually look at is documentation, right? If we have that, that's great. Sometimes we don't have that, but if we want to find out what our application is doing and actually make decisions about what to test with our API testing, we can just take a look into our application and see what it is doing. Now, whenever I click on any of these lines, I get a snapshot. I can sort of travel back in time and try to see the application that I'm testing on the state where it was when that request actually happened, or even when that response actually happened. So there's not a lot of change here. But also, if I open my console, I can take a look into the detail of that request. So this is something that Cypress is doing, and I think is really great that it's actually leveraging the console and the dev tools that we have at our disposal when we are writing tests. And yeah, basically, when I click on any of those requests, I can get to look at the details of that request. So I can look at the response body headers. I can look at the XHR, the whole XHR object. I can look at the method, the URL, and everything. So what I can do is to mimic this behavior and basically just start writing my API tests without documentation. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to type a request. So CY request. And as an argument for this command, I'm going to pass an object where I will define which method I want to use. So I want to mimic this behavior. I want to create a new list, but this time using API and not my UI. So that will be the method of post. Then I'll define the URL, which will be API/boards. And as you might have noticed, my application is running on localhost 3000. So when I do an API call, it's going to be localhost 3000 API/boards. But I have my configuration file where I define the base URL. So this will get pre-appended to my URL over here. So the, oops, typo. So the full URL will be http localhost 3000/API/boards. So I don't have to write everything, just the part that I need. And then what I need to do is to define the body, right? Because I want to write into my database, I want to create that board, and I know the API by heart, so I can tell you that the argument or the attribute that we're going to be sending is the name. So that will be the name of our board. So let's do something like hello there. Hello there. When I now save my test, it's going to run these two commands, right? CY request, CY visit. And I can see them over here. I have my request and my visit, and I can see the result of this interaction. Let me make it bigger so you can see this. And you can see that I have successfully created my board just using API. So instead of clicking and creating, I used the request and created my board directly. Now, if I want to take a look into the database, I actually have a very, very simple database over here. As I said, this is an application that is not for production. It's for just for my workshops. And the database is just a JSON file over here. So I can see my two boards over here. So it's an array of objects, and every object represents one board. So we can see our hello there board and also the board called board. Yeah. So, so what can we do with this? We can go ahead and delete this CY visit, and instead of focusing on the UI, just focus on the API. So what I can do is that I can decide to test this request. Basically, if I click on this request and take a look into the console, I can see this yielded argument. This is very important one if you are writing Cypress tests. This is basically saying that this is what is passed on to the next command. So we can actually work with whatever we have in this yielded attribute. And as you can see, we have the object with the body, and we have the status, and all these kinds of information from about the request. So we can test anything we see here. We can test, we can test the response body, and we can test the status or anything we choose to test. So to do that, I'm going to use then command, and I'm going to chain off the thing that the request has yielded. So let's call it board. And I'll write my assertions here like this. So I'm going to expect that the board status is going to equal 201. When I save it, my test is automatically going to rerun, and I can see that the assertion has passed because the board status, the status of the response from this request was actually 201. I can take a look into some other details as well. For example, I can take a look into the start attribute over here, right? I'll look into the body and start. So let's make sure that this is false, because that's what I'm expecting it to be. Board, body, and start. And I want it to be false. Let's do that. Save my test. And voila, suddenly I'm API testing. So that's good. Let's move it a little bit further. Let's move on to the second test, and that's using plugins. One great thing about Cypress is that it's all JavaScript. So whatever JavaScript allows you to do, you can do that in Cypress as well. Which means we can use a lot of great plugins that the community has contributed with. So here I have two constants. I have the board name, which I'm using over here in my request. And then I have an expected body. So this is something I'm going to assert with. Now, when I run this test, I'm just sending the request. I'm not yet using that expected body. But as I run my test, I can see that I have my request over here. I can take a look into the console and take a look into what's happening. But I have this whole blank area at my disposal, which is not showing anything because I'm not opening any application. So plugins come to the rescue. And one of the great plugins was made by 𝒊𝒑𝒄𝒆, and he created this CY API plugin, which I think is awesome. What this enables you to do is to show the output of your API requests and responses right in the browser. So to install it, you will go npm install, but since I have already done that, I already have that available for me. The syntax is pretty much the same as request, just instead of request, I'm going to use API. So this is a new command that's coming from the plugin. And when I save my test now, it's going to do the same, but voila. And the difference is I now have a visual feedback, and I can take a look at the request I have made, but also at the response, which is pretty neat. Kind of reminds me of Postman. So yeah, and it doesn't stop there because there are many different plugins. So let me show you a problem, right? I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to use a then function, and then I'm going to destructure the body of the response, and I want to write a test. I want to make sure that it corresponds with this expected body. So let's do expect body 2, and since I'm going to compare two objects, I want to deep equal equal and the expected body. Basically, I want this API call to return this. Yeah, I made a typo again, so you know that this is live. Now, when I save this, the test is going to fail. And the reason for that is we need to take a closer look into this. But I'm going to show you. So the expected body over here has the ID of 1. The response body that came from the API call has the ID of 7. So basically, this is the problem. Now, this is something, the ID is something dynamic that is always going to be changing. So we cannot really do a deep comparison and leave out the ID. So we're facing a problem here. But luckily, there's another plugin, which is, again, kind of amazing, and that's called 𝒄𝒏𝒄𝒆. So this one allows you to do all kinds of different assertions. Basically, when you have Cypress, you have chai library bundled within Cypress, but this is another library called 𝒃𝒄, and 𝒄𝒏𝒄𝒆 is sort of a wrapper around this library, and this allows you to do all kinds of really cool assertions. So we can, for example, do I don't want to call it soft assertion because I don't think that's the correct name for it. But if we want to make sure that everything, that the expected body has the name of board name, user of 0, star is full, created is this, and the ID is whatever, but please be a number, we can do that. So let me show you how. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to import 𝒃𝒄 into my test. I'll just go top level over here. And then what I'm going to do is to call the 𝒃𝒄 function within my then function. So something like this, 𝒃𝒄, and that's going to be a function which is going to accept an object that's going to contain all of the assertions that I want to make. So I want to make sure that the body is going to have a name of board name. So make sure that this doesn't change. I want to make sure that the start is false, that the user is 0, and then we get to our ID. Oops, forgot the comma. And I want to make sure that the type of the ID is actually a number. So let's do 𝒃𝒄 type and number. So when I save my test now and run it, you can see that I'm asserting everything as I need it to be. So I make sure that the name is good, the start is good, the user, and as you can see, I didn't use the created part. So it's not doing the comparison like a deep equal comparison where everything needs to match. I can just do a partial comparison of the things I actually care about. And if I care about the ID being a number, I don't care what number it is, but make sure that the type is number, I can do it like this. So that's pretty neat. Now, when I did this test and cared very deeply, about the about the type of number, it might have reminded you of JSON schemas. So let me filter out this test. And actually, I don't want to do post. I want to do get here and make sure that the board is 1. Sorry for a last minute changes over here. And yeah, and I'm also setting the header, and I don't want to get too much into detail why I'm doing that. Is basically that's how my application works. So yeah, what if I have a JSON schema and I want to validate my response from the request against a schema? Well, I can do just that. And again, this is something we can use a plugin for, but this time we're not using an NPM plugin, but we're just using a plugin for chai assertion library. So since Cypress has already chai bundled in the application, what we can do is that we can use any kind of plugin we have for 𝒌 and basically use it within Cypress. So I have a 𝒌 JSON schema, which validates schemas against the thing we give it to. And what we need to do is just to install it. And on Cypress side, what we need to do is I'll go to my E2E configuration. Well, this is not a configuration file. This is a support file. So if you're coming from version 9 and before, that's going to be Cypress, support, and index. Now it's called E2E. And just call this 𝒌 use, and I'm going to require my 𝒌 JSON schema plugin. And that's all I need to do. What this now enables me to do is that I can just take the body. So I'm using its body to access the body attribute from whatever this request will yield. And I'm going to use my shoot command and call JSON schema to be of some sort of schema. Now, I already have a schema file in my support folder. So if you take a look, I have some required attributes. It's called, it is a board schema, and we have some properties defined that the name should be of type string, that the user is of type number, ID is also a type number. Basically, this could be more complicated, but I wanted to choose something simple. So I have board schema. So let me just import this into my file. Here it is. And I imported it as a board schema. So let's pass it on to our, where am I? Here am I. Into my shoot assertion. And now when I save this, I can see that the assertion is passing. Now, if you're a skeptic and don't believe me, I can change this board. I'm going to basically screw up my database and change this ID to a string. And when I save it now, and the response will, and rerun my test actually, and the response will not come as a number, but as a string, you can see that my validation is failing, and it's actually telling me that the type is invalid. It's actually a string and not a number. So let me fix that back. Yeah, don't write to your database directly. Unless you have something like this, then you can. All right, so let's move on to the next test. I'm going to dot only, and now I'm going to open my application. So in my application, I'm doing a sequence of actions. It went pretty fast, so let me just walk you through that. I'm opening my app. I'm getting this create board item that's over here. I'm going to click on it, and that's going to reveal this input. And inside that input, I'm going to type new board and hit enter key, which is going to create my board. I have been over this flow, but just to make sure that you're following, I went through it one more time. Now, what I can do with Cypress is not only call my APIs directly, but actually take a look into what my application is doing and combine my API and UI test into one, which is a fun thing to do and can be really useful. So to do that, I'm going to use a slightly different command. That's called intercept. So instead of calling the API call directly, I'm going to tell Cypress with this intercept command, hey, watch out for this API request to happen during my test. So I'm going to define which one it should be with a method of post, and then with a URL of API boards. Now you might see a pattern here because I just used the same kind of syntax as I did with request, right? I defined the method and defined the URL. But in request command, I was the one sending that request. With intercept, I am just telling Cypress, hey, watch out for this post API request to happen, and then we'll do something with that. So I'm going to give it an alias, which is a way of telling Cypress to not only watch for it, but give it a name. So let's do board create. And when I save my test now, you can see that the board create sort of a highlight is over here. Hopefully you can see it well. It's sort of in a smaller font, but this is basically the request we are interested in. Now, what we can do is we can write a test, use a wait command, and then use the alias. And what we will achieve by doing something like this is that we are going to validate if a request like this will actually happen. So if our API was down, if our test was doing just type the new board and then hit the enter key, then the test would not be complete because we didn't validate if that request will actually happen. And not only that, if I click on the wait command inside my Cypress runner and look into the console, again, you can see this yielded attribute. So this wait command will actually give us some information, and we can test that. So let's do that. I'm going to again use a then command. Oops, make that a then. Let's do a board. And not only I can write an assertion on, for example, the response status code. So let's do expect board response status code to equal 201. So that will work, right? Giving me 201, the API call was successful, but I can also take a look into the request. So let's imagine a situation where I'm going to create a new board, type my text, and then, I don't know, hit a couple of white spaces here. Maybe I want them to have trimmed, or maybe my front end is doing some funky thing and it's adding those white spaces. Now, this is not what I want, right? So instead of just checking the response, I can make sure that the request that is going towards the server and is going to write into my database, that it is actually doing the thing it should. So let's do expect board request, and let's take a look into the body and the attribute of name, and I want it to equal the new board. Now, obviously, I would put this into some variable, but I don't have time for this, so let's just do it like this, and voila. Not only am I testing the response, I'm also testing the request. Now, with the intercept command, we can have so much more fun. So let me show you. Let's go with the next test. So what I can do is not only follow a request and see it happen, I can actually change its response so I can get to some maybe hard to reach edge cases. Now, intercept command accepts this object over here where I basically define which request I want to watch for. But also, if I pass another object, this is an object that will define how I want to handle that request. So for example, I can choose to define my own body. And normally what this get API boards, which loads the list of all of the boards in my application, normally what it would do, it would return an array of all of the objects that my front end will render out in the application. Now, if I pass an empty body, what's going to happen is that my front end is now going to behave just like if I haven't created any boards at all. Meanwhile, if I take a look into my database, I can see they're all here. So not only that, I can actually also change the response status and try to test my application for cases where, I don't know, my server is down or something. So let's, in here, I'm targeting the post API boards. And I want to make sure that when I visit my application and create my board, these two actions do that. I want to have the status code of 500. So let's test this hard to reach case. Well, actually, I think, yeah, here's the here's the error over here. Let's just do it like this to show you once more. All right, so basically when I choose to match this URL, these API boards with the post request, I can choose to return a status code 500. It's not going to make my server fail, it's just going to cut off the real response from the server that would usually come and use my own. So what I can do when I want to test my APIs and different API situations for my front end, I can just use intercept, provide my own response, and see my front end behave or misbehave, depending on how you look at it. So, for example, I can take a look and make sure that the message that's over here, you cannot see now, the error message is going to give our user some feedback that something's wrong. Maybe you should contact the support. One more thing I'm going to show you because I'm out of time, but very quickly. So one thing with mocking or stubbing the response is that you're not really, you don't really have, what's happening is that you're substituting everything. But with the intercept command, you can just choose what you want to substitute. So you can combine real data with your stubbed data. And that is when instead of passing a second object into intercept, you're going to pass a function. Now, within this test, what's happening is that we are taking the request, and I'm actually printing it out into the console. So let's take a look. Oh, let me run that again. And I have the whole request and all of the methods at my disposal, as well as some of the function. So what this enables me to do is to take a look at this request, and I have some methods over here, and the reply is the one that is going to take care of my reply. So let's just use it really quickly. I'm going to use a callback. Sorry for going through this a little bit faster. And I'm going to use a delay. So what this is going to do is that it's going to delay the reply or like the response from the server by 1200 milliseconds. So when I run my test now, you can see that I'm loading data, loading, and there's, oops, sorry, that went too fast. And there's this message when the data is loading for too long. It's going to appear after a couple of seconds. So this is taking too long. Do you want to reload? And this might be a very hard to reach use case, but with intercept, with taking care of that get command, we can get to that and we can simulate a delay. Now we want to make sure that the reload button is working, and in my test I'm going to click on it, but as soon as I do that, it's going to do that reload again. I'm going to wait for 1200 milliseconds. So what I can do is to define how many times I want to match this request, and if I put in ×1, then Cypress is just going to match it once. So after I click on the reload, then it's not going to make that delay anymore. All right, that was the demonstration. Sorry, I kind of started going faster and faster by the end because I got a message that we're kind of running out of time, and I do want to answer your questions. Before we do that, I would like to invite you to my workshop that I will be doing in October. So if you're interested in learning stuff like this or some core knowledge, then Cypress Workshop is for you. Hope to see you there. You can scan the QR code or go to philiphric.com/workshop. So thank you very much, and let's, I guess, jump into that questions.
Okay, I think that was an amazing session.
Hey, oh, I hear you now.
Yes, I mean, yeah. So that was a really wonderful session, and I was like so amazed to see how Cypress has evolved. Like from basic functional testing to the way it is now supporting API testing, component level testing, and a lot of other like functions all across. Like how testing communicate could evolve around Node.js is quite proven
Yeah.
with Cypress. That really sounds good. And I've also learned, like a couple of new libraries and how they are implemented just to, like get my API testing easy. That is really fun. So
Uh, I'm glad to hear that. I hope the rest enjoy that as well.
yes.
It was a lot of fun.
Cool. So we have a couple of question from the team, and they are,
Mhm,
like pretty eager to know, and I also am eager to know a couple of these what the community is asking for. So I'm just presenting you a couple of questions on the stage.
mhm.
Yes. So can we use BDD with Cypress tool? I think that is the hottest question so far we have got.
Yeah, so you definitely can. So when, as I mentioned, so Cypress allows you to. How Cypress does is that it will inject your test code and interact with your application inside the browser. Before that injection happens, there's actually a pre-processing part. So if you're using TypeScript, that will get compiled to JavaScript, and there are different pre-processors you can use, and one of them is actually a Cucumber preprocessor, which allows you to create your feature files, and then they get compiled into plain JavaScript, injected into browser, and run within the test runner. So it's definitely something you can do. However, with the syntax of Cypress being so simple, and with abilities to create your custom commands and to do all kinds of stuff, I'm sort of leaning on the side that these BDT tools are not really that necessary in Cypress context. But I guess that would be for a bigger discussion. But to answer the question, yes, you can do that. There's a plugin for that.
Awesome. I think Abhishek is happy to know that. So I'll be presenting the next question.
Ooh, okay. So whether we can integrate SQL database in Cypress, you can definitely do that. So as I mentioned, Cypress runs tests in browser, but at any point during the Cypress run, you can actually move away from browser and go into node environment and run any kind of script you want. So if you have a script file with some sort of SQLize action or something that will either seed some data into the database or retrieve some data from the database, you can do that. It's there are no like custom there are no commands that will I don't know, like do a select in database for you or do something like that. You basically need to code it yourself, but you have that flexibility of jumping out of the browser for a moment, doing a task with the cy_task command, and then move on and continue with your test. So that's kind of great for yeah, integrating SQL into your Cypress tests.
Awesome. Awesome. Sounds great, Philip. I think Manish will now be able to test with his DB as well in Cypress. Thank you, Manish.
Thank you for that question.
And next up, I think this is also some of my, like one of
Mhm,
my, sorry, just state, yeah, this is one of my favorite question. Like I would also love to hear. So, when
mhm.
are like Cypress going to like support for multiple languages?
I'm assuming that by multiple languages, what's meant is like multiple programming languages, like
That's correct.
not only JavaScript, TypeScript, but also Python, C Sharp, or something like that. Honestly, I don't feel like I'm an expert in that, but to my knowledge that I have, I think it will not be possible to support other languages than JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever can get compiled into JavaScript, because we are running our tests inside browser. That's different with tools like Selenium or Playwright. They are basically entering the browser from outside. They're using driver to drive the browser, right? With Cypress architecture, there's it's a little different. It provides you with a lot of advantages, but of course there are some limitations, and language support is one of them. If there would be another language support, it would probably still get just compiled into JavaScript. So I don't think there are too many reasons to do that. But
Got
that's
it.
just my opinion. Don't quote me on that.
Got it. Sounds great. Thanks, Manish, for the question.
Thank you
So
very much.
I have one more question. I think this also is
All
kind of,
right.
like interesting. So what
Mhm.
if, there is somebody, I think Bharati has asking, like, what if I have, like Selenium test case, which I've already been using, and now I want to migrate to Cypress for my,
Mhm.
like API testing or any other new kind of modules which I want to do with along with side with my functional testing. So how would I, like do that?
So the integration part, I think if we were to take a look into how to integrate, we would probably need to take a look into the code and get into the nitty gritty details of how that can be done. But if I understand the question correctly, you already have some kind of setup in place that
That's
is
good.
going to take care of data creation. So you seed your database, prepare it for testing, and you can definitely do that. You don't have to change that if that's all it does, right? You see your database, you have it in the state you want it to be, and it's now ready for testing. So
Right.
this would be kind of a same example as I said before. You can jump away from your browser, do a task, and then continue with your test. um, Also, what you can do, you can run a task like this when your Cypress is being opened. So this
Mhm.
would be something that's in the configuration file. So I'll probably have to pull up the documentation. But if you take a look into the config file, you can set up different kind of node events, and one of those events can run while your tests are being opened. So the first thing that will happen, so you're going to run all your scripts that set up your database, and only then you move on to running all of your tests. So I think it's doable. It looks to me, at least. So hopefully it
Awesome.
is.
Sounds great. So I think there is one more interesting question. So can we use Cypress for automotive native mobile apps?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as I mentioned in the beginning, you can use Cypress to test anything that runs in the browser.
Right.
So you can if you have a native application that will run sort of a web app inside it, you can take that part and test it with Cypress, and you can get pretty far with testing that. Well, depending on how the application looks. But if you want to simulate something sort of like Appium style, where you open the application and then do interactions and stuff like that, or install the application even, then you probably not probably you will not be able to do that. So no native iOS or Android apps will work with Cypress, but you can take the web part and test that. So that's
Got it.
that's
So
what
is
you do.
there, do you feel that, like that is somewhere, like Cypress is also looking forward in their roadmap?
Honestly, don't know, and it's kind of hard for me to imagine how that would work, given the current architecture where you basically open the browser and inject the test code inside, because you're kind of dependent on that browser. And I don't know, maybe there would be a way of opening an iOS emulator and injecting into that something. But I honestly, like, I'm just fantasizing here. I'm not really very fluent in that area, so don't quote me on anything.
No problem. Like I think Cypress is on the way ahead soon for it. Yes. So we have one more question from Arun.
Mhm.
So what are the recommended plugin that we can utilize for API testing?
Oh, I kind of already made my recommendations during the presentation. Definitely check out the CY-API. That's a really good one if you want to see the request and response inside your browser, and then also the CY Spock. That's a really powerful way that can give you various different ways of how you can test the response or anything, and also the JSON schema thing. I think that's pretty useful. So if you already have your schemas generated and you want to test your APIs against schemas, then that's super useful. So definitely you can do that. And there are maybe a couple of more. Just these three are kind of my favorite when we're talking about API testing.
Awesome. So I think there is one more. I think this is also something which I'm also looking at. So this is by Corina.
Mhm.
And is there any way to import Cypress test scripts from Postman?
I don't think there is.
Uh-huh.
I'm not aware. Probably somebody else is already working on that, but
Okay.
I haven't really tried that. Well, Cypress actually just recently released a migrator application, so migrator cypress.io,
Hmm.
which can help you migrate your protractor
Okay.
tests into Cypress or demonstrate how they can be migrated into Cypress. So I
Hmm.
think the Postman and Cypress might be kind of an interesting one because it seems like they might do some more stuff, not only protractor but maybe some other tools. And yeah, maybe Postman might be next. Who knows?
Awesome.
It might be interesting.
Sounds great. So I think that would be the last question for the session today, Philip.
Thank you
So
for all the questions. It was interesting to see what you are interested in. So
right.
thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, same here. So it was great actually, like talking to Philip, knowing about like how Cypress is used for API testing, and it is used for like end-to-end testing and also for component testing. So like the kind of scale at which they are driving in, that is very furious for me. So to all of viewers out there, like we hosting all our recording sessions on our YouTube, so you can get back and listen them again if you want to, and also you can then share with your peers so that they will know like how Cypress is so useful and it's going to cut down your time for your API testing. Happy testing and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.